You in fairy tale, live for someone else, not for me. Love is out to get me, the way it seems. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. More I gave, the less I got. Oh, yeah. What do you try it? All you get is pain. When I want the sunshine, I got rain. And that's all I got. I'm a believer in other space. I got it, I'm in love. I'm a believer, in that you try it. All you get is pain. When I want the sunshine, I got rain. And that's all I got. I'm a believer in other space. I'm a believer.
Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where social awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all-around nerds convene, talk, and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Nerdy Occultist, aka The Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello and good evening, everyone.
And I am your host, last time I want to be the brains of pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I am doing mostly well because, as I told Brainstormer before we came on, I started a new book series, so I'm happy.
And I freshened up for the show, so I feel pretty good myself.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. It's amazing what a shave and a nice hot shower does to one's attitude. Okay, just waiting for the article to load. Let me. Okay. All right, this is from the Innis Herald. It's from the InnisHerald.com. Chasing a Mirage, What Valentine's Day Reveals About the Problematic Ways We Love, written by Clover Chen, published February 11th, 2022. Huh.
It's odd that some of these we've missed, but at least we got to them eventually.
All right. I am anti-Valentine's Day. That's the beginning. That's the first sentence.
I suppose at least you came right out and admitted it instead of waffling on for a page and a half like so many of these articles do.
I mean, to be fair, I am also, but for very different reasons.
And as per usual, I am not, because to me being anti-holiday
Well, okay,
is
I'm not
like
okay. I'm not anti. Look, I'm not anti Valentine's Day, exactly. It's just more so I don't see the reason for myself personally to indulge in it, given my kind of beliefs on showing of love.
Mhm.
Again, we've had this whole conversation before, so
We have many times, at least once a year.
yeah. Again, my whole stance on it is, to me personally, again, it's my own personal opinion, that if you are with someone and you take it out of one day to make it special in the relationship for someone, then I think clearly you're not doing the relationship right. Because I think, again, my personal opinion, that you should treat every day with your significant other as Valentine's Day. Again, that's just my personal opinion, and I'm also a romantic sap, so.
And while we're going over our sort of preemptive ground here, my opinion in regards to that opinion is, just because you try to make every day special doesn't preclude you the possibility of going the extra mile on the day of, as per the holiday. Because, as I was about to say, to me, being anti-holiday is a little bit like trying to be against the tide. You can try it, but it's either going to make you incredibly bitter and cynical, or you're going to get bulldozed by the tide anyway. So why would you not use the force of the holiday to your benefit?
That's fair. Again, I just think, yeah, again, I think, it's just like, if you really do love someone, you're going to treat them very fucking special, no matter what.
Yeah, and much like their birthday,
Okay, Dalton, we're just going
Valentine's
to do,
Day.
okay, Dalton, how we usually do this is going to be a circle. We both know this, right?
Yeah, but
I
on to
understand, I understand your point, obviously. Again, I don't think we're going to change our minds on our stances here. So,
but moving forward, because
yeah, we
we
can literally
have
spin it.
a nominated antagonist, apparently.
Yeah, we could literally spend an hour just debating this. We have.
We can, and we have many times over.
Yeah.
And as
Okay.
soon as we get all the Valentine's Day episodes organized into a playlist, you'll be able to see evidence of it.
It's going to be a while, but.
I would do it, but I don't have access to this particular channel because we could technically have shared ownership of it, but we didn't think ahead when we did that. So, womp.
All right. So let me just start over with the article then. I am anti-Valentine's Day. Yes, I could argue that Valentine's Day is a capitalistic scheme that bastardizes romantic love, one of the only things we cannot place some monetary value on in this world. Yes, I could actually, do you want me to keep reading, or do you want to address that first?
Okay. To start with, one, as I've always said with regards to holidays, capitalism doesn't create shit. It serves impulses that will always inevitably be there. Because holidays, especially, seem to be woven into the human condition on some level. And again, you can try to stand unmoved in the, roaring of the tide, but you're more than likely either going to become very, very cynical as a result thereof, or you're going to be very, very disappointed when the tide inevitably sweeps you along, whether you like it or not anyway. So, capitalism is not to blame for dick, or veg for that matter, in fact. What it does is it identifies a thing people want to spend money on and then gives them the outlet with which to spend that money. And by the way, transactionalism is not a four-letter word, you cunt. Most of the most beautiful relationships in human existence are transactional. And I'm sick to death of this bullshit where people define transactions as their own failure, their own worst case scenario. A balanced transaction is one of the most beautiful parts of the human condition. We need to get out of this fucking programming where transaction means the opposite of transaction as and when we want it to. A good balanced transaction is a thing of human beauty. It is the impulse that leads to us having friendships and working relationships and professional relationships and all the kinds of relationship. So we need to get over this defining transactionalism as its own failure bullshit. Yes, a bad, scheming, duplicitous, lopsided transaction is a terrible, terrible thing. But why in the fuck are we using the word transactional to mean its own worst case scenario and never linking it to any of its beneficial formulas? And by the way, if you're not transactional in an interpersonal relationship, that is usually what's called either codependency if you're the one being taken advantage of by the absence of transaction, or you being a manipulative little shit who's taking advantage of people in the event that you're the person who is being given all the shit in a relationship. Because that's the thing. A human relationship without any element of reciprocity and transaction means a one-way unilateral relationship. Means I get everything and I give nothing, or I give everything and get nothing. And frankly, friends, Romans, countrymen, I far more want to demonize that bullshit. A relationship without any element of transaction is a shit relationship, and we need to stop demonizing the very notion of give and fucking take. Moving on.
Alright, yes, I could argue that a holiday that romanticizes performative rituals of chocolates and flowers takes away from celebrating healthier aspects of romantic relationships. Yes, I could argue that self-love is neglected and under-celebrated in comparison to romantic relationships, but I would only be able to argue those if I did not have a more foundational issue, which all those perspectives take for granted, one that lies with a problematic idea of what romance is, fundamentally.
My fucking god, this person sounds absolutely terrible. And I'm assuming it's a woman because this kind of
Clover Chen.
ridiculous bullshit only happens with wealthy white women.
Clover Chen.
Clover could be a unisex name, so I'm not going to speculate. I could see a guy's name being Clover if I really wanted to. But point being, this kind of bullshit only tends to happen with really, really out of touch middle class or upper middle class white women. So I'm going to assume that this person is a woman for the sake of this argument. But before we get into the fundamental issue that this person has with romance, people like giving each other chocolates and flowers because chocolate tastes good and is a luxury item, and flowers are pretty. And if they're actual living flowers, they are also rare and ephemeral, meaning that their beauty is all the more bittersweet when it's here, and that makes for a decent display of love. That's the main reason why Valentine's Day and romantic birthday celebrations for your significant other, come to that, usually feature some element of chocolates and flowers, because chocolates taste good and flowers are beautiful in a rare, ephemeral sort of way, which is very sentimental if you're the type of person to be ruled by that kind of beatific sentiment. It's not some sinister capitalistic cabal, you nutcase. It is humans' desire to be sentimental with one another. I can't believe I have to keep doing this thing where I explain the very basic building blocks of being a human to fucking grown-ass adults. Moving on.
Alright. I find Valentine's Day problematic because it is a celebration of normative romance and sexuality. I'm no cynic. I love love. I'm all for it. I am all for it, actually. But my idea of love is very likely to be different from yours.
Okay, so now comes the part where I autistically beg you to define your fucking terms, please. Moving on.
Alright, from a very young age, we have been force-fed a particular narrative. Meet the perfect person, fall passionately in love, establish a strong connection with them, be faithful, get married, start a family, grow old together. We'll learn about what we want to have, internalizing tropes by reading about Prince Charming's and the Girl Next Door, or by seeing Rihanna and A$AP Rocky's couple photos on Instagram. We learn about what we want to avoid by watching people closest to us get into toxic relationships, or learning against our will about whatever Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly have going on. But either way, we fall into imitating the social and cultural paradigms surrounding love.
It doesn't even occur to you that some of this might be evolutionary and innate, does it? And it doesn't occur to you that a desire for that kind of love is one of the most fundamentally, beautiful parts of being a human being, goddammit. Again, this idea that, you're being cynically puppeteered by some cultural narrative instead of you or pretty much everyone wanting that kind of thing, because that kind of thing is one of the few reasons for humans to remain alive in many circumstances. So many people have been motivated by a desire for and or an experience of love in the way you describe. And frankly, to activistically be opposed to that is frankly being in opposition to one of the fundamental drivers of the human experience. And yes, you can wax lyrical about how the idea of romantic love, such as we have it today, wasn't developed until the early Middle Ages, blah 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 frickin' blah. But again, the storytelling, the folklore, the mythologies, every aspect that we have of pre-existing time periods at least alludes to some kind of informal deference to that. The only other option is pair bonding for political reasons, i.e. when a maiden marries an old king for status and coupling reasons rather than any particular affection for them. And even then, even back in the days before courtly love, quote unquote, there was still this expectation that even if you didn't love the person going into the arranged marriage, you would eventually develop that kind of affectionate bonds with them and for them. So again, I put it to you, this thing you're trying to demonize is one of the most fundamental forces of human psychology and human nature, just full stop. It's not the quintessential motive, I suppose, because there are other, more basic, Maslowian stuff on the hierarchy there, but show me a person who's never felt motivated by love, and I will show you an incredibly desperate and probably very bitter motherfucker. And it's me saying that, just so we're clear. The very definition of a desperate and bitter motherfucker on occasion. But even I at least hope that I will someday be proven wrong about this someday. I hope I will find my Prince Charming, as it were, And by the way, for those that don't know, yes, I am gay. So I hope someday to meet my Prince Charming. However desperately difficult that seems to occasionally fucking be. Moving on.
Alright, I noticed the harmful aspects of normative sexuality are an oversight to even the most self-reflective people, my past self included. Our internalized ideas about our most personal relationships tend to escape the rigorous critical thinking we might apply to other topics. Normative romance and sexuality are so ingrained in our culture, media, and social ideas that we often take them for granted.
That's because love is one of those motivators that frankly bypasses like frontal lobe type reasoning most of the time, because it is simply that fundamental to the human existence. We develop these sorts of emotional bonds with those we find near and dear to us, and to try to over intellectualize them is frankly almost dehumanizing in a way. And again, I don't want to fall into the trap of going herder my transaction, because as again I said, I think we need to stop defining transactionalism as a complete failure to form a proper transaction. But being that as it may, even in the most transactional form we're talking about, when you give someone love, you're giving of yourself in a more fundamental, energetic way than you are when you're just calculating it like a freaking abacus. Like, the reason why love so often short circuits so much of our higher reasoning is because love as an impulse has been a part of our human psychology since before the frontal lobes developed to the point they are now. Again, trying to argue with your desire for love is a bit like trying to argue with the sea as its tide comes in. You can try it, but you're going to look very, very stupid, and you're very much going to end up bitter and cynical by the end. I would advise you to just accept that your desire for love comes from an organic place and isn't some diabolical cultural imposition on you. And again, like, you can make the argument, I suppose, that courtly romantic love in the way we modern people would recognize it didn't really develop until the Middle Ages. But then again, in truth, making marriage vows of your own will and not some political arranged marriage bullshit is also something that didn't really happen until the Middle Ages. So the emergence of these two things together probably does make some kind of sense. More marriages in previous time periods were politically arranged and weren't really supposed to bring about happiness, so happiness wasn't always at the forefront. But the second it could be a thing, it was a thing. I find that to be somewhat indicative. Do not you? Like, what in the fuck? Moving on.
Alright. Another thing that contributes to us not questioning normative sexuality is the fact that normative sexuality, like other dominant cultural powers, i.e., whiteness, expands and contracts to whatever will keep it in power and profit. For example, the way Valentine's Day themed ad campaigns will now include gay couples mixed in with straight couples to show diversity and appeal to a wider audience, even though marginalized in society are included and recruited into the pyramid scheme of romance.
Ahem! As you are, in the process of taking my own demographic from me as some kind of human shield, I am a gay dude, and I want a larger-than-life, monogamous, romantic, fucking happy ever after relationship. And fuck you if you're gonna tell me I'm wrong for that. I want my Prince Charming, and I've made no secret of that. I want my frickin' Gary Stu himbo, thank you very fucking much. And if you're going to tell me that I'm internalizing hetero norms or whatever the fuck because of that, then you can fuck right off. Gay men are not somehow immune to the desire for a long-term relationship. unless those individual gay men happen to be very, very shallow, and or if they happen to be the kind of people for whom monogamy is full stop not a thing, which I specify because there are people who are pansexual and demisexual and all of the other assorted sexuals. But for the most part, to be human is to want a long-term, monogamous, romantic fucking relationship. And it's not internalizing heterosexuality to do that, you cunt. And even if it were, you don't get to use me as a human shield to beat up on Valentine's Day. Fuck off. Moving on.
Right. While normative romance is able to include anyone in its conscription, it also places harmful limitations on its participants. One such limitation is mononormativity.
The word you were looking for is monogamy. I don't know why you call it mononormativist. Except that you want to have the luxury of claiming anything you don't like. It's just a facile, surface-level norm that you can disparage. People want monogamous relationships more often than not because monogamy is a sign of loyalty and long-term investment. And it has been since the fucking Stone Age. That's why we still have it, you cunt. Moving on.
In the All My Relations podcast episode, Decolonizing Sex, Dr. Kim Tallbear defines mononormativity thank you, or compulsory monogamy as the expectation that long-term monogamy is the normative standard to which we aspire.
Mononormativity,
thank you, is founded on the values of capitalism and colonialism. Marriage is an institution historically tied women and children economically to men, awarding the men of the household additional land for their wives and children. Essentially,
mononormativity
culture was legislatively promoted through marriage as a way to culminate wealth while policing and owning women's bodies. Jesus Christ.
Okay. I'm gonna have to play the MRA card. The fact that you can see marriage as oppressive to the woman, but never oppressive to the man, even though men in pre-industrial societies were often spared from violence if and only if they could say, please don't hurt me, I have a wife and children. That indicates, therefore, that according to the sentiments of a pre-industrial society, men are valued primarily as utilities, essentially, and that their sentimental individual value mattered for sweet fuck all. That's why men, historically, were very focused on achievement, because while women were given sentimental intrinsic value by definition, and to some extent that also applied to children, but it applied more so, by the way, to girl children than boy children. And we can look at the linguistics, therefore, if you really want me to provide the example. Because the word boy in Old English specifically was a term restricted to slaves. The word girl was actually at one point the unisex word for any child below adult age, and the words man and woman were not the common words at the time. The words were were man, meaning conscious man, from which we get the prefix for werewolves and so on, and with man, because man used to be the unisex for all adults. I point this out because, going back to my original point, The statement, "Please don't hurt me, I have a wife and kids," means that men have no intrinsic value sentimentally, and women have intrinsic value automatically. Which is why men have derived their value traditionally from the things they can do, get, or accrue. Because nobody was willing to give them sentimental value from the off. Whereas women, for pretty much all of human history, have in some sense been intrinsically valuable regardless of whether they had any skills or not. So, yeah, no, if you want to... I'm not saying marriage is oppressive. I am saying that if you want to claim it is unilaterally oppressive to women, then I will raise my hand and point out the other half of the history you're ignoring. Especially when you consider that in pre-industrial societies, if a woman overcharged her husband's accounts, he would be drafted off to debtor's prison, which is actually the historical reason why women couldn't, quote unquote, own property on paper and men had to sign for things. Because it was considered unthinkable to subject a woman to the concept of debtor's prison, because debtor's prisons were considered unilaterally awful. But you will notice, if you're paying attention to the little sleight of hand here, a man having to sign for his wife's properties means that if she overdrafts the family account, he is the one who is responsible, and she does not have to haul off to debtor's prison. This thing was called coverture, and it is the main reason why feminists bitch endlessly about women not being able to legally own property. That doesn't mean that they didn't de facto own property. It means that if there came a criminal liability with regards to how a woman mismanaged her property, it was her husband who would get hauled off to prison for it. So yeah, no. Marriage is not unilaterally oppressive to women. If it was oppressive in any way, it was oppressive to both parties. End of discussion. Moving on.
All right. Dr. Kim Tallbear, joined from Indigenous Ontologies of Good Relations.
Ontologies?
I don't fucking know.
I'm pretty sure the word is ontologies, but I could be wrong.
I don't know. Okay, I don't know words, man. Ontologies of Good Relations illustrated the colonial impacts of compulsory monogamy. She connects the same principles of ownership from the colonial area to colonial idea of private property to principles of ownership over your partner in monogamous relationship dynamics. Jesus Christ.
Okay, once again, I'm going to have to call your bullshit bluff here. Because if you want to talk about colonial America, I will remind you that colonial America was very, very, very religiously fundamentalist. Hence all the flogging and the scarlet lettering and the burning of witches and, well, hanging in the colonies, because English colonies were under English law where witchcraft was considered a civil rather than a religious crime, but my point stands. Namely, that the rationale for Puritan laws or any other assorted form of evangelicalism in the colonies was first and foremost primarily the Bible, from which I shall now quote, because 1 Corinthians 7 verses 4 and 5, which state that a man leaves his family and cleaves to his wife, and that a wife in turn is also considered the property of her husband. I'm pointing this out because this once again gives, and yeah, no, I didn't quote exactly. I apologize for that. I couldn't remember the exact wording when I needed it. But regardless, 1 Corinthians 7 verses 4 and 5 because I'm specifying that because people love to hyperfixate on verse 4, which say that a wife is her husband's property, and then they completely ignore verse 5 when it immediately follows by saying, and also a husband is his wife's property. It's essentially a statement that neither person belongs wholly to themselves and unilaterally belongs to the other. It is essentially saying that you own me and I own you in turn. What this means, essentially, therefore, is that according to the Bible as read, neither person belongs to themselves, but belong to the opposite party. Now, you could get my agreement in some sense by saying that this is complete bullshit because it erases the idea of self-ownership. And if that were the argument, I would be right there with you. But you are trying to frame this as women most affected, quote unquote, when in actuality, both men and women were considered each other's property under Christian law, as per the Bible. Which I would say is dehumanizing and bullshit because it completely ignores the idea of self-ownership, but the one thing it isn't is inegalitarian. It is unfair to both parties, but it is equally unfair to both parties, most likely. Moving on.
So, what would the solution of mononormativity? The simple answer is popularizing non-monogamy or other unconventional relationship dynamics. But the true goals are to deconstruct the pedestaling of monogamy as the only correct option, destigmatizing other relationship models, and focus on relationships where we do not own or police each other's bodies and behavior. Okay, I could kind of understand the second part of that.
Yeah, the ownership issue is a bit suspect, especially when you're talking about two humans owning each other.
I was talking about the destigmatizing other relationship models. I can understand that. I don't. Again, I mean, to be fair, I'm gonna say I'm pretty monogamous. Like, if I get a partner, it's just me and them. But I got no. Again, I'm not really a guy who judges unless you're being a piece of shit.
Yeah, I have friends who have open relationships or are pansexual, and it's whatever. But the reason why most people, by and large, gay and straight, regardless, want a monogamous relationship is because they hope that once they find their one person, their special long-term person that they want to be with for the rest of their lives, that will be enough and they won't need anything else. The ideal, and yes, it is very much an ideal that doesn't usually map onto reality, and that's very interesting and cynical and blah, but the ideal for most people who desire monogamy is the idea that once I find that special someone, they will complete me so completely that I won't need or want anyone else. That is why most people, with a gun to their head, would probably say, I want a monogamous relationship. It's because, not because of some social enforcement mechanism, derp, but because love is like any other imbalance in the human condition. It's like being hungry. We eat with the hope, at least in theory, that we will eat something where we no longer have to feel hungry anymore. And love is very much that same way. Ask anyone who longs for a monogamous relationship, and they will be able to tell you that the main reason they want a monogamous relationship is so that they can stop feeling so empty inside and feel like the person they're with actually and meaningfully completes them in some meaningful way. Like a starving man hopes to someday no longer be hungry, a love-struck person hopes to one day no longer need anyone else to fill that hole in their lives. It's not some sinister cabal of capitalists and patriarchs. It's a simple desire of starving people to no longer feel hungry, basically.
Okay. Well,
Moving on.
I think that part of what a culture of domination has done is raise that romantic relationship up as the single most important bond, when of course the single most important bond is that of community. Bell Hooks is the quote.
Silence, communist.
He's a communist?
Because of the centering of community, derp. Yeah, no, fuck off. People care about those individuals they care about. They don't care about some abstraction of all the community or some shit. Silence, communist.
No, she isn't. Bell Hooks was an American author, theorist, educator, and social.
I know who Bell Hooks was. She was the bitch that Anit Sarkeesian patterned all her talking points after. But the point still stands. Fuck your abstract community. Most people care about individuals. As well they should.
Okay. Moving on.
And they certainly wouldn't prioritize the actual individuals in their lives under community. Like the typical ordering of the world is things begin with the self as an individual, out to those individuals that the person is related to by family or by deliberate association, then out to any systems or institutions that prop up those individuals that people care about, and then to the nation state or the wider world. If you're asking people to prioritize the wider community over all the individuals they care about in their lives, then you are a crazy person, and probably at least pseudo-communist, hence the silence communist bullshit. Moving on.
Relationship anarchy is an approach to intimate relationships that applies anarchist principles like autonomy, anti-hierarchy, and community interdependence. You can form unconventional relationship dynamics where you do anything you want and call it anything you want, as long as everyone involved is consenting and communicating. Yeah, that sounds like that's supposed to be an open relationship, right?
It's an open relationship magnified out to like a society-wide type thing. And no, again, I'm not disparaging the people for whom orgies are satisfying, or open relationships, or polyamory, or any of those arrangements. But most people actually want to find someone with whom they can be monogamously happy, because again, it's very much like being a starving person and then finally feeling full afterwards for most people, i.e., the hope of most people, including myself, is that someday I will hopefully find someone who is so amazing that I will no longer long to be with anyone else ever, unless and until something happens to them, in which case we'll start over and obviously hope to find another person who will satisfy that hunger. What you're describing is basically the romantic equivalent of a buffet where you just take a little bit of everything and hope that it's satisfying. And maybe for a while it might be, but trying to solve the romantic hole in your life with orgies and group sex and shit is, to me, a little bit like trying to get nutrition out of the like appetizers you'll get at any given buffet. You can do it, but you're gonna have to put a lot more work in, and most people would rather just get one entree and have done with it under most circumstances. Moving on.
Relationship anarchy is then a useful approach challenging compulsory monogamy, but also relationship hierarchies. Relationship hierarchy is the idea that your relationship have an order of importance in your life, with your romantic relationship holding more value and weight over other ones.
That is inevitable. Like you do understand the notion that some relationships are simply better relationships than other relationships, right? And that the idea of a romantic relationship is to make that person the most important relationship in your life because they are the most important person in your life to you. If you don't do that, then again, if you're pansexual or polyamorous, all the more power to you, but in a general sense, most people are not going to be satisfied with the fact that they like their friends better than they like their husband or wives. If that is the case, then someone has clearly fucked up the emotional math here. Again, if you asked most people who desire monogamy why they desire monogamy, they would probably say something like, because when I find my one person, I hope to no longer feel this endless aching need for other people so desperately. And I would argue that if your significant other isn't the most intimate relationship you have, then you have a shitty significant other. Or you settled for someone who you deserve better than, is typically how that goes. Like, I love my friends to death, but I hope that someday I will find someone who inspires in me the kind of loyalty that I can call the most important relationship in my life. And I hope that my friends will in turn also find that for themselves. And if they don't, then one or all of us have clearly fucked something up here. But that is again, you appear to be taking issue with an ideal and then forgetting arbitrarily that it's an ideal as and when you are dealing with it. Most people do want their significant other to be so significant to them that they would prioritize them over other relationships. And most people really would like to find one person who is good enough to fill all of our personal holes. There's a reason why the phrase finding your better half is a euphemism for finding your ideal significant other. Because when you find your better half, they fill all the holes you have, and you hopefully fill all the holes they have. And then they lived happily ever after, etc. And yes, again, I'm aware that that's not always how it happens, and more's the pity, but that is at least the goal that most people tend to be shooting for with monogamy and long-term relationships. And someone might contradict me, but I would be very fucking surprised if most people contradicted me en masse. Moving on.
Have you ever witnessed a friend get completely consumed by their romantic relationship and then stop spending time with anyone else aside from their partner? An example of relationship hierarchy, placing the romantic relationship as paramount over the others. No, that is called a toxic fucking relationship.
Or just the puppy dog phase, depending on how long it lasts.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Like when you first met someone and you're both swooning on brain chemicals, that is not necessarily a toxic thing. If your significant other insists that you spend time with them more than other people, then that is a toxic relationship, and you should dump that person like a piece of hot lead. But that's neither here nor there. Moving on.
Alright, a related concept is what Rice University philosopher Elizabeth Brake calls amatonormity. The social expectation that essential exclusive romantic relationship is normal for humans. Amatonormativity has a twin concept in compulsory sexuality?
Again, I don't really subscribe to the theory that any part of this is compulsory or under duress. Most people default to monogamy because most people want to not feel hungry anymore, to use my hunger analogy. We want to find that significant other who makes us feel full, emotionally and romantically speaking. And yes, there are people who like life to be put in a buffet style, and for those people, all the more power to them, but they're not the norm. And there's probably an evolutionary reason why, because back in the day, if you didn't know who was boinking who, then that puts your entire genetic lineage into some question. So, both like human nature wise and also evolutionarily, it makes sense that most people in a gynocentric social species such as ours will be some flavor of monogamous. The tournament model also exists, and there are times in our history where there's been more pair bonding and less tournament style, and there's been more tournament style and less pair bonding. But as a general rule, we like gyroscopically default back some way to tournament model if we can manage it, but most often monogamy. Because evolution and genetics are cruel masters, but they do what they do very, very well. Moving on.
All right. Author of Ace: What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex, Angela Chen defines compulsory sexuality as a set of assumptions and behaviors that support the idea that every normal person is sexual, that not wanting socially approved sex is unnatural and wrong, and that people who don't care about sexuality are missing out on utterly necessary experience.
Unnatural is debatable because again, we live in a world that is dominated by the principles of evolution. So yes, actually it is somewhat unusual for a sexually reproducing species to have no sexual impulse. That's like, and not to sound too eugenicist about it or nothing, but if you are in a sexually reproducing species and you don't have sex or the desire to have sex, then you are, from an evolutionary perspective, a dead end. Granted, gay men and lesbians are, in some sense, genetic dead ends too, because until we figure out how to make like artificial insemination and artificial wombs stick en masse, you're not going to get a child from two gay men without the interventions of something like artificial wombs. Same thing with two lesbians. But, being that as it may, and this actually helps strengthen my point here, if you are in a sexually reproducing species and you don't have any impulse for the sex, then you are rather unusual and are evolutionarily speaking a dead end. There's nothing morally wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. That's why I will say it is somewhat unnatural or naturally uncommon, but it is not morally or ethically wrong in any way. If you don't want sex, then by definition you're just opting out of sex. And all the more power to you as far as I'm concerned. But because we live in a world that is predominantly dominated by evolution, those who bang the most frequently and the best and the, most advantageously go the spoils. The rule of evolution is he who fucks and fucks the best or the longest or the most wins the game. And those who don't have any impulse to fuck opt out of the game by definition. Them's the rules. Moving on.
Alright, do you ever notice how virtually every song on the radio is about either love, sex, or both? Depends on what channel of radio you're listening to be honest.
Well, fair, but also, I'll take her point for the sake of argument. The reason is because love and romance and or sex are one of the most fundamental parts of being human. Doesn't mean that you're like morally wrong or suspect or anything if you don't engage in it, but you are a very atypical human if no part of your self is devoted towards I want to find either sex or romance. Such people exist and they are fine to exist, but they are, as I just explained, opting out of the game that is evolution. And it is not surprising in a sexually reproducing species that that has a very long gestation period for its offspring that we devote a lot of energy towards the dynamics of sex and romance and the establishment of long-term, usually monogamous relationships. It would be kind of odd, in fact, if we didn't, given what kind of species we are. Moving on.
One sec. Alright, amatonormativity, fuck off, and compulsory sexuality furiously manifest themselves in the media we consume, with harmful effects on our identity, language, and institutions. The way we conceive sexuality or romantic relationships is political. Motherfucker.
No. No to any of the above. You keep calling it compulsory sexuality, but there is very little in the way of compulsion there. Now, mind you, this wasn't always the case. Back in the, 30s, 40s, and 50s, for example, lynch mobs were a thing, and they happened because, or rather, I guess I should say, they usually happened because of one of two things. Either someone who was considered undesirable was alleged to have boinked above his social class. That's why a lot of lynching victims were black, because according to the higher than thou Southern belles at the time, only a lower class strumpet would lower herself to doing it with a black guy, herder. The other half of lynchings, though, were usually gay men. And despite what feminists want to revisionist history into people's heads, the idea that people hated gay men because they were somehow feminine and therefore the gay male oppression was somehow equivalent to the female oppression. The actual reason given why many gay men got lynched is because to be a gay man was to be a man who was attracted to other men, which sort of by definition means that if you're a gay man, you're a man who isn't attracted to women. How dare he? Let's lynch him, etc. Which I could, again, if I wanted to, play the MRA card and point this out as yet another example of how society has almost no intrinsic regard for men whatsoever. But I think the point stands on its own merits. I don't need to belabor it any further. Moving on.
Alright, for example, sexual liberation in feminism has come to mean that having a super exciting and pleasurable sex life is empowering, and yet, as Angela Chen puts it, because sexual variation exists, there is no universal version of liberated sexuality. Instead, true sexual liberation is the freedom of choice with one's own sexuality.
Duh. I can't believe it took academic feminism this long to get to the point of to be sexually liberated means to be divorced from any and all mechanisms of compulsion and just doing what the fuck you want to do. Which, I mean, to be fair, that is correct as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're not violating the harm principle in doing so. That's the only kind of sexuality that you're not permitted to do, or that you shouldn't be allowed to be permitted to do, in my opinion. Unless you are, in some sense, taking someone against their will, in which case, bugger off in the non-fun way. As long as you are doing whatever you want to do with someone who is consenting to do the thing you want to do to them, I say go nuts. But it's not a political statement against some oppressive patriarchy, TM. It's just you taking your own personal initiative and doing whatsoever the fuck you want. Why the fuck you need to throw in all this patriarchal oppression nonsense on top of the simple notion of fuck you, I do what I want, is beyond me. Or rather, it would be beyond me if I hadn't spent so long in my life trying to figure out how and why all this feminist theory bullshit is in fact bullshit. Moving on.
Both metanormativity and compulsory sexuality work in tandem with mononormativity to create a broader idea of what is normative romance and sexuality. Heteronormativity, fuck off, is also included in this construction of normative love.
And again, I'm going to speak as a gay dude here. Even I can acknowledge that the reason why most romance stories are heterosexual in nature, or heteronormative if you absolutely must, is because it actually is biologically normal for most members of a sexually reproducing species to be heterosexual. We are not an asexual species. We don't reproduce by budding, a la SpongeBob. In order for our species to procreate, you need one male partner, one female partner, and probably some monogamy between the two of them, so as to, make sure that the offspring comes to term, because we as a social species have a very long gestation period for our offspring. And I'm not even just talking about the 9 months it takes to actually have the child. I'm talking about our children aren't born with the innate knowledge they need to do what they do, like a lot of species babies are. It takes 9 months to gestate the child, and then it takes another, 16 to 18 years to actually make them an adult. And as a result, we figured this out a long time ago. People who prioritize monogamy make better parents than people who don't prioritize monogamy, because the longer both parents are in the offspring's life, the better well adjusted the offspring is going to be, and therefore the best chance they are going to be to pass on their genes. Which, again, I remind you, in the back of all of this bullshit is evolution playing the game that evolution always plays. He who fucks the best and most wins the game. Moving on.
Heteronormativity, whatever the fuck, I don't give a shit about how to pronounce it, coined by Michael Warner, refers to how both our legal institutions and social cultural institutions are entrenched with heterosexuality as an ideal and to value any deviation from this norm. This originates from colonial binary ideas about gender and sexuality that shape how we conceptualize romantic social scripts. It also manifests in the words we use for topics like parenthood, i.e. the nuclear family, marriage, and other relational language.
My sweet one, this goes back a long-ass time before the colonial period. And two, the reason is not some nefarious moral hierarchy. It's simply because in a sexually reproducing species, most of our species are going to wind up being heterosexual. roughly 5 to 10% of it will fall somewhere else in that system, like, gay men and lesbian women. But by and large, because we are a species that reproduces asexually, with a male partner and a female partner being biologically necessary to gestate the offspring, heterosexuality is the norm simply because it mathematically is the norm. Actually, if we want to be super technical, the ratio of heterosexuals to non-heterosexuals is more like a ZIF mathematically than a norm, because a norm mathematically just means 67% or above, whereas a ZIF, I believe, is 82%, which is a little bit more reflective of the actual numbers. But point being, yes, that roughly 10% of people are going to wind up being somewhere else on the spectrum, but that doesn't change the fact that 90% of all the other people are going to wind up being some flavor or other of heterosexual. And also, can we just stop acting like there isn't a bunch of variation in heterosexual relationships too? Because I guarantee you can fill a room full of nothing but straight people, but they're all going to have different preferences for what they want and what they like in their ideal partners, as the rest of them do. Like, I dispute this notion that heterosexuals never have any deviation from the quote-unquote hetero norms, Derp. Moving on.
Alright, sorry. All of those above defined terms play into how we culturally conceptualize love, romance, sexuality, and consequently what we celebrate on Valentine's Day.
And there's nothing nefarious or manipulative or foolish about any of that. It's literally every part of reality functioning as intended, basically. Like, most romances on Valentine's Day are going to be heterosexual, because most romances, period, are going to be heterosexual in the species we have, which is a sexually dimorphic pair bonding species and shit. You act as though this is some nefarious plot by the devil to trick people into being hetero, but it simply is not the case. I am also in that 10% of people who isn't mathematically normal, Derp, but ask me if I care, and the answer will be no. I just would like it if I could walk down the street with my future significant other without getting, sideways glances and people being arbitrarily grossed out if we kiss in public or whatever the fuck. As long as we can get there, I don't particularly have any other goals in mind. I just want to find my person who I can be happy with for the rest of my life and then call it a day. If that happens, I can basically check love and romance off my existential checklist. And until that happens, I'm going to be very miserable on Valentine's Day, because I'll probably be whining about being alone. But that too is one of those que sera sera type things. Moving on.
Rethinking romance and how we love. The idea of romantic love is one of the most destructive ideas in the history of human thought. Toni Morrison in The Bluest Eye.
You're gonna have a really hard time selling that to most people, because again, even the most cynical asshole probably at least wishes that the romantic ideal was possible, and all the rest of us who are ever so slightly less cynical see finding someone to love us and love them in return as one of life's fundamental things to check off the checklist, as I just went into previously. Eventually I hope to find someone who I can be with forever, and then I can check love and romance off my existential checklist. But until then, it's probably going to stay on the checklist because it's one of the most primary motivators of being a human. We want to be loved. So much of human sexuality is tied to not physical things, but to the idea of someone loving us in turn. Anyway, moving on.
Alright. Ask yourself for a second, what is romance? Images of heart-shaped chocolates or a surprise bouquet of flowers might pop into mind. Or maybe you have your own ideas of intimacy and closeness. Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever the case, the idea of romance is much more fragile than we might initially believe. It is easy to deconstruct its defining features by asking how romantic relationships differentiate from non-romantic ones.
But why in the name of fuck would you want to deconstruct it? It is one of the ultimate goals of being a human. Like, it's something that people dream about from the time they are old enough to understand what a story is. That's why so many stories end up with the guy getting the girl, or the girl getting the guy, or the guy getting the other guy, and so on. Like, these desires are fundamental to what it is to be a human. Why would you want to deconstruct it? That would make the world increasingly shittier. It's kind of like, in theory, you could find a way of muting all the color we see in the light spectrum, but why in the fuck would you want to? Moving on.
Yes, you might not kiss or have sex with your friends, but depends on the friends, I suppose. But you might, in a friends with benefits dynamic, yeah. Yes, you may not share your most intimate secrets with your one-night stand lover, but you might with your closest friends. You can surprise your friends with flowers. You can take yourself out on dates. All of these defining features are not unique and exclusive to a romantic relationship. No shit.
Yeah, you're acting as though this is impossibly rare knowledge when all you've really done there is say things that are obvious. And by the way, some of us, and I again use myself as an example, don't particularly like the idea of a one-night stand because we internalize the idea of a one-night stand as a failure. Because in my head, the idea of a one-night stand is if I'm not good enough to convince this person to stay, then why in the fuck are we having sex in the first place? And if they're not the kind of person that I would want to stay with long term, then why are we having sex in the first place? To me, a one-night stand or a fling is the idea that one way or the other, I have failed somehow. Either I've failed to convince someone who I wanted to stay long term, or I'm having sex with people that I know are beneath me on the other side, and I wouldn't want that either. To me, a one-night stand is a failure. If romance goes well, then it turns into a long-term relationship. If it fails to, then either I have failed by not being discriminating enough in my partners, or I have failed in a failure to convince someone to stay with me long term. Either way, I don't particularly like the idea of that, because my anxieties will twist that into you're going to die alone and never be loved, which is not a picnic in my head when that happens. Moving on.
All right. So the question stands: what is it about a romantic relationship that makes it so special? Spoiler alert: nothing in particular. Romantic love is a social construct reinforced by normative culture. Okay, clearly this motherfucker's never been actual love.
Yeah, no. Again, there's a reason why so much art, music, poetry, fucking portraiture, every form of creative endeavor that humans have ever humaned will have some aspect of some relationship to the concept of love, because it is one of the most fundamental forces of like human nature and human psychology in the fucking first place. Like, everyone wants to be loved on some level. Even people who are asexual and aromantic want to be loved in the friendship sense, and so on and so on and so on. Like, to be loved is one of the most fundamental desires of to be a human goddamn being. And this isn't a recent development. There have been, love poems and love songs written since humans figured out what music was in the fucking first place. Like, one of the oldest Greek pieces of Greek mythology is Orpheus going to Hades, as in the place, to get Eurydice back. And how does he convince the Lord and Lady of the Underworld to let him make this attempt? Simple. He is a musician, and he uses the sorrowful song he wrote since Eurydice's passing to convince Hades and Persephone to give him a shot. So right there you have music and song being so, and love being so inextricably linked with each other that this probably had been going, that before this story was written down, it probably existed as an oral tradition for millennia before even that. And if you want me to provide you biblical examples, we can find you biblical examples too. Like, even in cases where this kind of love is somehow sinful, as with, I don't know, the Nephilim and the other children of the Watchers, it still acknowledges that one of the most fundamental motives for any sentient creature is some version of love, romance, lust, etc. I don't think you're ever going to be able to deprogram the human mind to not want love in the most fundamental of ways. It's kind of like trying to convince a human that you shouldn't eat food. You can try, but sooner or later, the people who become convinced of this are going to die off in an impotent way, or they're going to break their own rules and eat food, because you can't convince people that food is bad long term without serious consequences. Even when you tell people to not overindulge in food or lust or love, etc., that's still usually a very hard sell for humans. That's why the list of 7 deadly sins exists in the first place. Moving on.
All right. As I touched on above, a lot of the ideas surrounding romantic love and sexuality celebrate colonial capitalist values. These cultural norms go hand in hand with other systems of oppression, like white supremacy, ableism, gender-based violence, or faith-based discrimination. The narrative of normative love is a political tool that decides what is considered transgressive and who is transgressing.
No. The idea of monogamy well and truly predates a long-ass time the idea of capitalism. If you mean the idea of interpersonal transactionalism, then that goes back much farther than capitalism or any form of supremacy of any kind, except for maybe tribalism. Because in the older frameworks of love, the idea of being transactional was not a bad thing. In the ye olden times, being transactional was actually how you demonstrated to someone that you did care, that you were willing to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. In fact, in many older ethical paradigms and custom paradigms, if you weren't willing to put something on the line to as collateral against your word was basically considered meaningless. Because if it really mattered to you, you'd be willing to put something on the line to prove it. And there again, you claim to be so insightful with regards to human psychology and human history and things, but you never took any effort to understand anyone's perspective but your own, and your understanding of history is the most surface level, superficial thing I've ever seen. If you don't actually understand the way that ancient peoples thought, then you don't get to use ancient people as some kind of fucking human shield. And also, by the way, I caught what you did there. The jab about ableism. I have spastic diaplegic cerebral palsy. Please fuck off out of my safe space and stop using me as a human shield, please.
Safe space?
I was being cheeky, and because they think everything is a safe space, etc. And by the way, the joke I was making there is the first and foremost quote unquote safe space a person has is their personal space. So fuck off out of it and stop trying to use me as a human shield, Miss Clover, because it's really pissing me off that you not only are historically and psychologically illiterate, but you also keep trying to use me by proxy as a human shield. And fuck off. Moving on.
Alright, almost done. This is key because beliefs surrounding normative love can be dangerous or even deadly. One instance of this is... One instance of this in play is how amatonormativity and compulsory sexuality culture make it dangerous for women to turn down advances from men from fear of being attacked or murdered.
For the love of all that is holy, my dear, just because women are afraid doesn't mean they have any reason to be afraid. Men love women by default. We're a gynocentric species. In fact, funny story, they've done several psychological studies on this, and it turns out that women actually have an in-group preference, i.e. on balance, women would rather spend time with other women. And men, you'd think that either they would have an in-group preference too, because of something like dude camaraderie or something, or that they would have an out-group preference because because getting laid and so on. But as it turns out, the way this shakes out is women prefer the company of other women, and men prefer the company of women. Which, if you're following the sets here, means that almost no one actually has a preference for men. Not even men. Men would rather spend time around women than they would other men. But that means that every human motherfucker, with the exception of the incredibly broken-brained people with cluster B personality disorder, the people who were literally traumatized as children and so on, every neurologically normal human being on this fucking planet learned what it is to be a human from their mother first. And as a result, even gay men actually have an out-group preference for spending time with women. And you want to tell me that women are in such danger from men. Meanwhile, one of the ways in which certain men will show off to women is by beating up other men for their benefit. So, yeah, no, you can fuck right off with that women are so afraid of getting violence done to them shit. Just because a woman is afraid doesn't mean that fear is actually founded on anything meaningful, statistically speaking. I.e., a lot of women are taught to fear people around them for literally no reason.
Alright.
Moving on.
Alright. Dismantling normative ideas surrounding love can help dismantle conditioned and commonly held beliefs about the either repressive or hypersexual sexuality of people with disabilities, BIPOC folk, and queer people.
Okay, well, I'm two of those. I am
Queer.
disabled and I am queer, and once again, you may take that attempt to use me as a ideological human shield and fuck right off with it.
Also, I'm as much as I hate this fucking word, I do fall under BIPOC folk.
Yep. And I'm guessing the answer is going to be the same one you're getting from me, which is please fuck off and stop trying to use this as human shield for ideologies we don't even agree with.
They can dismantle similar ideas that we might have internalized about the rational capacities of oppressed groups as well. I'm reading the article, by the way, in case people didn't figure that out.
Yeah, I know.
Calling into question what we assume to be true about our personal relationships is an easy but essential way to oppose harmful social forces. We need to reflect on what values we are upholding when we sigh dreamingly after reading a 43-chapter slow burn / fan fiction of our favorite anime ship. Okay.
Yeah, that's rich, like upper class or upper middle class women you're talking about there. Please have fun arguing with rich, entitled upper middle class women about their romantic preferences. I'll need a lot of popcorn to watch that discussion, but the one thing you're definitely not going to get that from is from me, because like gay I might be, and yes, I do occasionally enjoy romantic ASMR type stories or gay romances, but funnily enough, and this is a statistic that blows my mind every time I think about it. Do you know that heterosexual women are actually the largest consumers of gay fiction? As in, heterosexual women like reading about dudes screwing each other more even than gay men do, statistically. So in order to deprogram that particular canard, my dear, you're gonna have to argue with a lot of rich white women, most likely. And again, I will enjoy watching that with some popcorn, but good luck convincing rich white women that they ever do anything wrong. And good luck not getting canceled when they inevitably play the Uno reverse card on you. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to convince a rich white woman that she's wrong, but it's a very dangerous game. That's why the Karen stereotype exists, and the Helen Lovejoy stereotype existed long before that.
All right. There's like 2 paragraphs left, so.
Yep.
Yeah, if that last example was a bit too specific, please take that as a sign that I'm just as indoctrinated into mononormativity as everyone else. But I am also committed to unlearning these cultural norms and intentionally questioning my social conditioning. I love love, but accepting normative love just because it was handed to us is unacceptable. As psychoanalyst and social philosopher Eric Fromm wrote, love is a choice. Love is something within our control. We have the power to transform what we understand love to be.
But here's the thing. Why accept this notion that your ideas around love are inherently sinful or brainwashed into you or something? Why don't you just put the ideology down and like what you like? I'm starting to feel pity for you in the same way as I do with every fundamentalist. But here's the thing. I've said this before and I will say it again. Where your religion tells you that your desires are not okay, and there's no meaningful harm actually done by your beliefs or your desires, you can choose to prioritize what makes you happy over the religion. Whether that religion is supernatural, like most religions, or secular, like the ideology of intersectional feminism. You're trying to deliberately deprogram your own mind from things that make you happy because you're too worried that you got brainwashed into them. Well, if it makes you happy anyway, why prioritize the high-minded academia of feminism over your own happiness? Sounds like you're torturing yourself for literally next to no reason there, my dear. Moving on.
All right. Hello, Giant Turtle. Good to see you. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I wasn't really feeling the intro either, and I was kind of thinking, yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm doing pretty fine. I'm doing well. I'm doing good.
I'm doing okay too, DT. I've started a new series which you might like. And I think Grim recommended it to both of us a long ass time ago. I started the Iron Druid series. He's pretty good so far. I'm still on the first book though. Anyway, on to the next topic.
Yeah. For the record, I think we might have to skip an article and just go to the trailer thing we had after this article, just for time's sake.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And we can always shove it into next week's show.
Yeah. Okay, so this is originally from the New Statesman.com. A prison made of flowers, how Valentine's Day sells us patriarchy disguised as romance, written by Megan Murphy. Subheader is, after 3 waves of feminism, we're now being told subservience is romantic. The fuck are you on? No, that's what you guys say.
Yeah, guys, the reason why every kind of relationship usually has the equivalent of a top and a bottom is because the average top and the average bottom like it that way. Like, them's just the rules, and it doesn't always have to be quote unquote gendered in that way. I know plenty of women who are more assertive in their relationships, and I know plenty of men who are more submissive in theirs. That's for the people as individuals to figure out. But more often than not, people like filling either the dominant role or the submissive role because that's just how they like it. It's not some normative cabal of patriarchs decreeing from on high. Moving on.
All right. You have to buy me flowers, right? In an effort to avoid that presumably awkward moment where my boyfriend shows up on Valentine's Day, bouquet not in hand. I figured I would do him a favor. He was new to the serious relationship game. It was possible he didn't know the rules.
Okay, you're already presupposing a lot of shit even in that first sentence. And may I say, from the outside looking in, and mind you, you're the one who phrased it this way, according to the scenario you yourself have laid out there, miss, you sound very entitled, frankly, in an to an almost disturbing degree. It's not only that you feel just automatically entitled to his flowers without even asking him for them, but also the idea that you seem to think you're being incredibly magnanimous by reminding him to get you flowers. And in actuality, I'm sure it came off more as like a whip crack, because already in that first sentence, you strike me as the kind of very entitled person who doesn't even realize how entitled they are. Like, you simultaneously convincing yourself that you're so put upon for having to remind your boyfriend of this, even though you basically just mandated him to get you something, which he probably will end up getting you. So, the idea that you already have a chip on your shoulder at this particular juncture in your own hypothetical kind of disturbs me a little bit. Moving on.
Alright. Okay. No, Giant Turtle. It's actually kind of just that's just how I feel about Valentine's Day overall. that's about it. Nothing, no other holidays or even birthdays. So
I assume he's taking the time to catch up like he usually does.
yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, moving along here.
Now you have to buy me flowers, right? I already read that. Sorry.
Yes.
Now I'm fully aware that cut flowers are not only useless but environmentally responsible, but that hasn't prevented me from adopting certain expectations around the day, nor have my feminist sensibilities. However much I rationally understand that holidays like Valentine's Day are a little more than a tacky cash grab and an excuse for men to pretend as though uncomfortable lingerie isn't really just a gift to their penises. Jesus.
Again, this warped, like, simultaneous entitlement and also feeling aggrieved about the things to which you think you're automatically entitled in the first place. Like, it's one thing to think you're automatically entitled for shit. It's another thing to be bitter and cynical about the things which you seem to think you're entitled to. It's like you have two separate chips on each shoulder, and it's fucking with my head. My dear, if these things make you happy regardless of your feminism, is it possible that your feminism might be the problem? It's like at the end of the previous article. If your hyper strict fundamentalist interpretation of your ideology makes you unhappy, then perhaps it's time to re-examine whether those axioms are true or not. Like, it's the same kind of advice I give to people who have fundamentalist religious beliefs. If your fundamentalism makes you deliberately unhappy and you're not harming anyone by the things you want to do, except in the abstract because of morality, then maybe your sense of morality is the problem. Maybe the fundamentalist religion you've tied yourself to is the problem, and you should make yourself happier by letting yourself be free of it. Fucking hell. Moving on.
Alright, but I like them is an excuse that will hold up in feminist court either. Oh my god, if there was a feminist court, I'd rather be fucking dead.
We probably would be dead. We would have been called in front of the feminist inquisition by now. I'm sure. And the irony would be completely lost on them as they tie us both to our respective stakes.
Oh shit. Sorry, I was finishing my Capri Sun. My bad. If you heard that.
Nope. No sound was coming through your mic. It was fine.
Alright, there are an endless number of things people may well like which aren't necessarily good or ethical. See Hunter Moore, who loves ruining women's lives and behaving generally like a living, breathing sociopathic cat turd. As a longtime critic of "but it makes me feel good" feminism, I feel obligated to look at what it is behind the rules of romance many of us take for granted.
Okay, and again, if these things are not harming anyone, then maybe your fundamentalist interpretation of your particular religion is the problem. And yes, I'm calling feminism a religion. The fact that it's secular does not change its ideological devotion bullshit. Point being, if your ideology makes you upset, you have to ask yourself if the things that your ideology claim are sinful are actually all that bad, and if the answer is no, then maybe your ideology is the problem. If the moral hierarchy that you ascribe to makes you miserable and forces you to miss out on quite a lot of the good things in life, then again, my advice to you is the same as my advice to the fundamentalists of any given religion or ideology. Maybe your ideology is the problem, and you should free yourself of it for your own sake and betterment. Moving on.
Alright, when my boyfriend gives me his coat while we're waiting for a cab in the middle of January, I am grateful for the coat. Showing up at work and finding flowers that feels romantic. It's a show of affection that says, I want you and everyone in your office to know you are loved. But I've never bought a boyfriend flowers, and I would never give up my coat and freeze in order to keep my boyfriend warm. Okay, well, you're a selfish bitch. That's
Well, there's that, but there's also the fact that the reason that is probably because of the aforementioned gynocentrism inherent in the human being, i.e., women are the ones that are done for, and men are the ones who do, typically, according to most standards. Now, again, in a sane world, the issue with this wouldn't be, oh, how dare I, because my ideology abstractly makes me upset at this. The ideal rationale that might jog you out of this would be, maybe I should extend some of this special treatment to the person that I claim is special to me, even though he's a man. But we're having to deconvert this woman from feminism first before we even begin to sell her on the red pill. So, oh well. Moving on.
all right. When I realized the lack of beflowered boyfriends is not a particularly serious and pressing issue of our time, I also realized that when we witness a phenomenon that is very obviously skewed in a gendered sense, it can't simply be brushed off.
And yet, I get the strong sensation you're not going to suddenly become an MRA. You're going to find some way that women are victimized by the special treatment they're given, aren't you? You're not going to want to extend that special treatment to the other gender. You're just going to find a way that, even though nice things happen to you all the fucking time unilaterally because you're a woman, somehow you're the victim of it, really, Derp. I'm putting my money on that. If I'm wrong, then good for her for proving me wrong. But my suspicion is that she's not going to solve this inequality by caring more about her guy friend and extending special treatment to him. She's going to find a way that those things she likes, those positive things in her life that she gets unilaterally because she's a woman, she's going to find a way to make herself a victim of those things. Probably. Moving on.
All right. Feminist writer Jill, I'm going to butcher this, Filipovic points out that as a culture, we still believe there are fundamental differences between men and women in many ways, and that those differences are tied to power. We often frame those power differences as romantic or protective, she says.
Now, hold on a second here. There are fundamental differences between men and women that are biologically and neurologically measurable, but only extremely warped forms of traditionalism and feminism internalize these as power differentials. Usually the standard is men and women are both good at different things, and that's why they're treated differently. Which, again, as an MRA, I'd like to see some reevaluation on that score some of the time, but at least that makes more sense than something men have been oppressing the women's for all history or some shit. Moving on.
When we think about traditional notions of romance, we might think of things like jewelry, showy proposals, a man literally or figuratively sweeping a woman off her feet, acts that are tied to the notion of the male as not just a provider, but the romantic actor, and the woman as the passive recipient of romantic acts.
Again, I get the strong impression you're going to try to claim to be the victim of this, when in actuality, what you just described from the perspective of somebody like me who is an MRA is the man going out of his way to try and earn the woman's affections, and the woman simply having to be gracious in her acceptance of those affections. Again, in a sane world, we might be able to talk about why the men must always earn and the woman must always be earned, but I get the distinct impression you're not going to say, and this is why we should treat men better, you're going to say women are secretly been the victims of this the whole time. Somehow. Derp. Moving on.
All right. Journalist Anne Friedman says that even for those of us who don't believe on an intellectual level that men shouldn't be the dominant ones in heterosexual relationships, it's really hard to deprogram years of stories we've been told about romance.
Again, this isn't a uniquely heterosexual problem. Basically, every kind of relationship you wish to name usually revolves around someone being the more dominant of the relationship and someone being the more submissive member of the relationship. And believe it or not, there are women who are the more dominant in the relationship, or the more stereotypically masculine in the relationship. I will use a fictional example just because it's something that Dragon Turtle and I both know like the back of our hands, and it is yet another example of why Brainstormer should read the Dresden Files. Karen Murphy, for example, is the quintessential masculine woman. She will kick your ass and make you happy to have it happen while she does so. And there are women akin to a Karen Murphy in the world. Probably not as, universally awesome as Karen, but that's why fictional characters are what they are. But there are, in fact, women who are tough girls. There are women who are the more masculine in the relationship. And there's nothing wrong with that. The fundamental issue here, though, is something that happens regardless of gender, which is typically in a relationship of dominance and submission, the dominant party ostensibly has more power than the submissive party, but they are supposed to use that power not for unilateral domination, except for maybe in a BDSM relationship, but usually it is incumbent upon the dominant party to protect and serve the interests of the submissive party. The thing is, I can look at that as someone who is more submissive myself, by the way, and see that as a privilege that the submissive party gets from the dominant party. We are, at least in theory, the benefactors of the dominant party's strength and protection. And my word, is that shit hot when it happens. But women, and especially feminist or highly traditionalist women, don't actually see the positive side of being the submissive one. They don't see someone dominant using their power and strength for their benefit, even though that usually is what happens. They see it as some form of unilateral slavery, all the while being able to tell their men stuff they want, or stuff they need, or stuff they want done. And what is the response of every heterosexual man in human history? Say it with me, fellas. Yes, dear, whatever you say, dear, it will be done, dear. And yet none of that is ever taken into account in these kind of feminist bullshit articles. It never seems to occur to them that by being the submissive one in the relationship, they are as much as taking on an almost aristocratic position over the allegedly more dominant one. Almost never is that dominance used to hurt the submissive party. It's almost always used as a method for protection. But do the dominant party get any credit for being the strong, protective one? Fuck no. They're being oppressive somehow. Derp. Moving on.
Alright, okay. Despite our best efforts, we still learn men are the ones who have power, and as a result, it's not uncommon for men to feel threatened by women who aren't subservient, who don't need a male breadwinner to take care of them.
No. My dear. No. Men are, according to traditionalism, the ones with power, and as a result, they are duty-bound to use that power on the behalf of women and, to a lesser extent, children. That's why the saying goes, women and children first, because women and children, especially girl children, while I'm at it, are considered intrinsically valuable, while men and boys usually are the ones who are obliged to put themselves on the line so that the women and children, again, usually girl children, because by the time a boy is approaching puberty, he will start, getting set up for his man role. Women and children first means we are prioritizing the lives of the women and the children over the men and the teenage boys. But you can't see the with great power comes great responsibility or the noblesse oblige aspect of the male of the masculine or the dominant role. Those with the power to dominate must use that power and dominance for the betterment and protection of the submissive. But you don't see that aspect. You only see this person has power, so they must be using it in a Machiavellian way to oppress people. Derp. Even though that almost never happens, and many stories in our culture are literally about what happens when someone uses their power in a villainous way. That's why the main difference between the hero and the villain is the hero uses his power to protect and preserve. The villain uses their power to distort and manipulate. This is almost a universal in every story that we have. Whether it's Dick Dastardly versus Dudley Do-Right, or it's the knight versus the dragon, or fucking the Trojans versus the Athenians in Troy, for God's sake. Moving on.
Despite our best efforts, we still learn. Oh, sorry, I forget that. Okay. Number of times I'd be out at a bar and tell a guy I was a lawyer that he would literally turn around and walk the other way. Filipovic says, but it's sad truth that a lot of men still feel emasculated by successful women. Okay, those men are little bitches, in my opinion.
Okay. There's that aspect, but here's the more sympathetic reason why a lot of men are like that. Okay, it's because it's understood that usually, not always, mind you, but usually, women are what are known as hypergamous, meaning they want the person they wind up with to have equal or greater status than them. They want to trade up in some way. And if a woman already has the status and prestige of being a lawyer, that means that she's going to want someone of equal or greater status to her own. Again, not always. Some women are fine letting the man be the more submissive party, and all the more power to those women. But in general, and women will admit to this, if a guy doesn't have enough status to impress her, quite a lot of women get turned off by that. But because that would make at least some of the problem the woman's fault, you won't ever examine that aspect. You won't ever examine the idea that maybe high status women should realize that there's only so much higher they can go, and therefore to settle for an equal where they can. But instead, what you'll say is that, oh, those men who were turned off by the idea that they're going to have to rise to an even higher occasion if the woman already has power and prestige, they're just bitches for not being willing to jump through all those hoops, I guess.
That's fair, but I'm talking like,
yeah, and I'm not saying there are no men who are just straight up intimidated by it. That is possible too. I'm just pointing out that there is actually a rationale behind some men going, that woman is too rich for my blood, I can't cut it, and I know it, so I'm gonna cut my ties accordingly. Women like high-powered, high-status men And if she already is high-powered and high status in her own right, then she's necessarily going to be setting her sights higher on average. Moving forward, unless you had a thing.
No. Again, I guess. Well, actually, I do. Like, just one thing. It's my own personal opinion, mind you.
Mm.
If there are men who are barring what you've said, right?
Mhm.
Barring that, but guys who are successful but still don't want a successful partner, like a woman who has achieved things in her own right,
Mhm.
that feel emasculated or whatever, I would say those guys qualify as little bitches.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a rationale there. I'm not going to judge you for saying that. I personally would say that the guys who want a homemaker instead of a career woman are more. I hope they are more than happy. I hope they find that person. And I'm sorry that they couldn't make it work, because in the world as I would design it, everyone who wanted to be happily in a relationship could be happily in a relationship. But yeah, there are some men who want the more traditional, quote unquote, setup where they are the breadwinner and the woman is a stay-at-home mother. And I think that's also a part of the reason why some men might ditch the high-powered career women. It's because they don't want to inconvenience her by saying that, for example, she'll have to take time off work to raise the child when they have kids or something. So there again, shit's occasionally complicated, but I agree with you that some men could very easily just accept that they're going to be the one that has to do some of the work and move on. But love's complicated. It's been complicated for thousands of years, and it's not going to become simple now of all times. So, moving forward.
All right. A study that came out last year found that men feel bad when their female partners succeed or outperform them. The idea that a man's self-esteem might be tied to feeling more confident, strong, and intelligent than his female partner shows us that our heterosexual relationships are still steeped in old-fashioned notions of male power.
And you're never going to acknowledge that a large part of the reason why men like being powerful is because being powerful gets them female attention. Let's be real here. Many of the reasons why men do what heterosexual men especially do what they do is because they want the approval, the love, the admiration, the devotion, etc. of women. They want female approval. And quite a lot of women, as I alluded to with the hypergamy thing, like men with status and power. They like the Giga Chads, they like the businessman, the 6'4" businessman in the C-suite, and the 6 or 7 figure salary, etc. One of the reasons men aspire to status, not the only reason, mind you, but one of the fundamental reasons why men aspire to status is because having status and power makes them hot to women. And when anyone who isn't attracted to women is just as likely to get shoved in the incel box, especially in the modern day, or the virgin box in the old days, then obviously men are going to fight very, very hard to get whatever status and power they can so that they have a good chance of finding a woman who is the woman of their dreams and wooing her thereby. Moving on.
All right. As one who is both driven and outspoken, I've certainly felt that women aren't supposed to prioritize their lives, goals or careers above their male partners or families. It's seen as selfish and therefore unfeminine.
No, it just means that any guy who wants to woo her is going to be playing on hard mode most of the time. Because sadly but truly, most hypothetical husbands are more than happy to have a stay-at-home wife. But almost no wives would be anything but turned off by the idea of a house husband. Quite a lot of women get angry from the idea that a man would be being a freeloader or taking advantage of her, while simultaneously not finding it at all weird if they get into a more traditional relationship that they are a stay-at-home wife and their husband is the one bringing home the bacon. You see, it's that gendered blind spot thing I was alluding to earlier. The idea that instead of let's find a way for women to be victimized by good things happening to them, why don't we extend some of those good things to men? It's that unexamined blind spot there that continues to vex me with this bullshit. Instead of extending the special treatment that you admit that you get from your significant other to that significant other and try to be more egalitarian about it, you instead are going to do a bunch of mental gymnastics to try and figure out how you are victimized by good things happening to you. Moving on.
Friedman says that actually it's this issue that provides a context for how she feels about traditionally romantic gifts or behavior. I don't want flowers from the kind of guy who gets an easy look on his face when I talk about how great my career is, she says. In an equal relationship, where there is mutual respect and both partners do nice, romantic things for one another, Friedman says it's okay. It feels okay to me. Okay, that's how it's supposed to go.
That's fine. If go down with your bad self, extending some special treatment to men every once in a while, and so on. But I'm still suspecting that somewhere in this article we're gonna have a here's why women are victimized by all the special treatment they get bullshit. Moving on.
All right. All right. Every modern marriage, even many modern marriages, still maintain some patriarchal traditions that place higher value on men's lives and identities than women's. As Zoe Holman recently pointed out in the article for The Guardian, 82% of married Australian women still assume their husband's surname. And a survey last year showed that only a third of women in the UK in their 20s kept their names in marriage.
Okay, and the old school reason why you would take your husband's name has nothing to do with you being his property. It has to do with you being under his protection. Like I mentioned in the previous article, the reason why women couldn't own property on paper was because if the woman defaulted on her property, it was her husband who was accountable to the state to go to debtor's prison and pay off that debt. i.e., we got the man to sign the document because when that property is ill-used, he is the one we're holding responsible for it. That doesn't mean that women don't have access to that property or some shit. It means that she gets all the benefit of the use of that property if he gives it to her, but he has all the responsibility of paying for it as and when the debtor prison person comes knocking. But again, it's one of those aspects of, in order to understand why this happens and it not be for nefarious reasons, you would have to acknowledge some ways in which men are disadvantaged by traditionalism or the the default assumptions around gender. And we can't do that because feminism will have a fucking aneurysm if we ever acknowledge that men sometimes had it hard in history too. Moving on.
Alright. Despite 3 waves of feminism, the majority of women around the world are still clinging to this gendered practice. There are myriad reasons we can and do offer as justification for taking our husband's names: cultural or familiar pressure, simplicity, tradition. Maybe we never liked our last name to begin with and are taking this as an opportunity to replace it. What defenders of this choice don't often cop to, however, is the romance factor.
Okay, and again, having internalized what I just explained there, the taking of your husband's name wasn't a attempt to objectify you, but was in fact a acknowledgement of who was responsible for your protection. How are you going to twist this into women are victimized by being default protected by their husbands? I'm waiting, but I'm just I know the other shoe's gonna drop sooner or later, and women most affected logic is gonna kick in. I'm just wondering when. Moving on.
Alright, I remember being in middle school. I had this big crush on this boy named John Butterfield, and I still have my journals where I'd written Mrs. Jill Butterfield all over the margin. It says Jill Filipovic. It's a silly, embarrassing exercise that is also something many of us likely participate in as girls. It was so much a part of my understanding of what it meant to be in love with somebody, she adds.
Yeah, and here again, we have your ideology telling you you're sinful and immoral for finding joy in something. Your actual wants and desires appear to be at odds with your ideology again. Because what it seems like happened is you, like any girl, liked the romanticized idea of being swept off your feet by the Prince Charming for most of your life, and then you went to college and learned about feminism where they told you that that was the demon of patriarchy trying to control you or some shit, and now you're feeling guilty that you ever wanted those things in the first place. Well, I'm sorry, my dear, but one, in some ways, you have a blind spot where you can't see how things that are advantageous to you are disadvantageous to the men in your life. And on the other hand, we have the usual advice I give to people of fundamentalist ideological or religious backgrounds, which is if your religion or ideology demands that you disavow everything that makes you happy, then maybe you should examine whether that ideology is actually worth pursuing anymore. Moving on.
Since middle school, Philippic's perspective has changed. She argues in an article for The Guardian that the practice of taking our husband's names in marriage disassociates us from ourselves and feeds into a female understanding of self as relational. We are not simply who we are defined by our role as someone's wife or mother or daughter or sister.
And the men in your life are defined and associated just as much by being someone's son, brother, husband, etc. Like if this point holds any water, which it doesn't hold much, but if this point holds any water, it is something that happens to men just as much. Especially when you consider, and I brought this up in the previous article too, historically the word man meant adult with no modifier. The word boy specifically meant slave. The word girl originally meant child, and the word for the female gender was with man. I point this out because there's another funny little quirk of what we do with the word man a lot of the time. For example, fireman, policeman, etc. We add someone's occupation onto the otherwise blank modifier Because, historically, men were valued for what they do, what functions they had, what they produced, etc. Not for their intrinsic value as a person, but for what they've done for me lately, essentially. And yet we're not going to hear you extolling the issue of defining men's value only by what they have, get, and do. We're going to hear you complain that women usually took the surnames of the men who were obliged to take care of them by both custom and the state, and usually also God in societies that believed in religions and things. That's why a marriage was considered to be a vow between yourself, the community, and God in most of these original formulations. Moving on.
Alright, many women see it as a symbol of commitment and family unity, but it's a symbol that doesn't go both ways, and that matters. If it weren't a gender choice, guaranteed there would be far fewer Mr. and Mrs. Dicks out there. That it is viewed as more socially acceptable for women to take their husband's name than the reverse is symbolic patriarchy's hold on society.
Again, what you think is patriarchy is in fact a historical remnant of the idea that it was the man's job by default to protect his significant other. No such expectation of protection usually attached itself to the wife, which of course doesn't mean that no wife did it in practice, just like the idea that women couldn't sign legal paperwork for their own property doesn't mean that women didn't use property in practice. I'm sure there are plenty of women who were there to support their husbands through history and so on. But societally and externally and in any way that's meaningfully enforced, the assumption was women are the valuable people that need to be protected. Men are the people whose value is only tied to their ability to provide and protect in the way that women require. But because this looks like history indicating to us that women were, in some sense, considered more sentimentally valuable than the men in their lives, feminism will never come to terms with this. Even though, in modern society, we still, by the way, have a lot of scenarios where women have more rights than men, and we don't even notice because people usually don't bother thinking about caring about men unless someone explicitly brings it up. Moving on.
Okay. Looking at how traditional notions of male power and female subordination shape romance isn't meant to shame women who, like me, are admittedly tickled when surprised with a bouquet of flowers or who still appreciate their date opening the car door for them. Friedman is wary of falling into a dynamic where feminists spend more time beating on themselves for not being feminist enough than being angry about the patriarchal struggles they're up against. The burden of rewriting years of romantic narratives does not fall on you shivering next to your boyfriend after having rejecting his coat, she says.
Okay, and because I am the token men's rights advocate in these here parts, allow me to offer the following alternative. Maybe instead of you trying to convince yourself that the nice things your boyfriend is doing for you are somehow oppressive to you, you might ask yourself if your boyfriend ever gets such special treatment. And if the answer is no, you might, as someone who actually cares for him, assuming you actually do care for him, you might equalize this divide by giving him the same treatment that you get from him in turn. And you know what? He might actually like you more if you try to extend that kind of treatment to him, rather than trying to find a way that you are actually oppressed by all the nice stuff people do for you out of the goodness of their hearts. It makes more sense, do you see, to try to pay forward things you like than to try and pretzelize your brain into thinking that you're oppressed by things that are done that are nice for you. Moving on.
Filipovic says she tries to strike a balance between recognizing that gender differences play a role in my own relationships and trying to suss out which ones I can live with or even strengthen the relationship and which ones are actually undermining a sense of equality between us or speak to his idea of me as subservient.
No. I think I can speak for your significant other when I say he probably doesn't think of you as subservient. He probably thinks of you as special and in need of protection because you are special to him. And again, I consider it a far more humane way of thinking to wonder, should I possibly extend some of that special treatment to him rather than how am I victimized by this special treatment that he gives me? Just throwing that out there. Instead of navel gazing yet again on feminism, you might try to equalize the situation by caring about the men in your life, ladies. Just saying. Moving on.
The answer is not flowers are terrible, Friedman says, and the answer is not to deny every impulse we have, but to ask why we want it. And so I will take my flowers and my boyfriend's coat, but I will keep my name, my goals, and my independence. You can open the door for me, but that doesn't make me yours. Okay, that's just...
No one said it did. The action of a man opening a door for a woman is a way in which he treats her as his better. I mean, as much as we mock the term milady in today's day and age, keep in mind that for most of the early modern period into the modern period, the reason why men opened the door for a woman is because that woman was considered to be a lady by default. A lady being the gender inversion equivalent of a lord, which basically means that all men, for most of early modern history, have been obliged to treat women, even women in their same class, as though they were higher class than them. Because women are special and deserve special treatment, is the other half of the traditionalism that you keep ignoring as feminists. Moving on.
1 sec. Okay, we can do that last article, actually. It's not too long. So.
Okay, cool.
Reclaiming Valentine's Day. Published February 13th, 2018 by Pamela Cross. It's from PamelaCross.ca, so it's like a blog, I believe.
Probably.
Yeah.
Once more into the breach.
I have hated Valentine's Day since long before I had even heard of feminism. My elementary school years were not especially happy ones. I was not popular and for a couple of years was subjected to some very serious bullying. Not that there was a label for it yet.
I'm betting, I have no way of verifying this, but I am betting, and I would put all the money that I have to my name on this bet, that bullying came from other girls, didn't it, Pamela? This is the fucked up fucking upside down world view that feminism gives to people, and I don't understand. Or rather, I do understand it, but it took me a long time before I could fully articulate this. Women will bully other women and then blame men for that bullying somehow, and I don't. it frustrates me that they can pretzelize their brain that badly. That women can be bullied by other women and then blame the patriarchy for it instead of blaming those other women who bullied them. Moving on.
Okay. Valentine's Day was a particularly difficult occasion for me. This was before the era of fairness. Teachers did not send home class lists and instruct parents to have their children send Valentine's Day cards to every student or to none. As a result, I was one of those kids who got a couple of cards on February 14th each year, and I developed a strong dislike for the occasion that lasts to this day.
Wait, just so that I can be clear, because Brainstorm was yawning during part of it.
Sorry.
Did she say she only had a couple?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that by definition means that you did in fact have more than 0. And I point this out because, you know, even today, we as men are slammed with this whole incel label if we don't get any romantic attention from women. Fortunately, I'm gay, so I am immune to the ravages of the women scorned or unscorned and so on. But heterosexual men especially are shoved in the incel category if they don't get any positive romantic attention. And even back in the day, the only major difference was incel got swapped with the term virgin. But my point is, if you got a couple, that's still more than the boys in your class who were considered undesirable probably got. And the idea that she's not self-aware enough to realize, well, I did get a couple, so maybe I should have been more grateful for the couple that I did get, frustrates me. Because it means that she's completely blind to people who didn't get any. Moving on.
Okay, first, I'm gonna hate myself for saying this. First, beat the women. That's the title of this part of the article.
Abusers of any kind are extremely, extremely, extremely rare minorities. Not everyone who is abused goes on to be an abuser, but almost all abusers were themselves abused. And of the people who were abused, only the minority of those go on to abuse, but almost all abuse is done by repeat offenders. Meaning that if you've been abused, you've most likely been abused by the relative handful of people who are abusive, then you were likely abused by a bunch of people in a row. Because I know this is going to hurt a feminist's head really, really badly here, but men are in fact a lot closer to the non-abusive men in their company than they are to the minority of men who turn out to be abusive. By which I mean, those who abuse is a vanishingly small minority of repeat offenders, not a massive plurality of people who abuse. Moving on.
There are several stories about the origins of Valentine's Day. The pre-Roman feast of Lupercalia was celebrated between what is now February 13th and 15th, during which time there were animal sacrifices, after which men whipped women with the hides of the sacrificed animals. Women lined up to be whipped, apparently with the understanding that this would increase their fertility. No real romance to be found there.
Okay, I'm going to have to accuse you of being incredibly disingenuous here. because the kinds of whipping that were done during the Lupercalia were essentially playful spanking. They were not actually, like, they didn't actually fashion whips out of the hides. They would do the equivalent of like a towel whipping that you'd get in a locker room, and they would do it as a form of foreplay, kind of a tag you're it or a come hither gesture. There is no evidence that they were violently whipped with these pelts. None. Niet. Nil point. None whatsoever. Every piece of evidence we have suggests that whipping was, again, a kind of foreplayish play spanking. But somehow you're going to turn that into women are the victims derp. Never mind that women were lining up for it specifically because getting whipped by multiple men in this play spanking kind of gesture was a sign that you as a woman were particularly desirable to the opposite sex. And no woman has ever prided herself on being attractive or desirable to the opposite sex ever in history or something, derp. I still, sometimes it frustrates me trying to envision how feminist heads work. They will get mean girl behavior or posturing from other women and they will blame men for it. I don't fucking, oh god. Moving on.
Okay. During the 3rd century, the Roman Emperor Claudius twice executed men, both named Valentine, on February 14th. The Catholic Church celebrated their martyrdom at St. Valentine's Day. Still nothing very romantic about February 14th.
Well, I'm going to be extremely pedantic here and point out the names of the people in question was more than likely Valentinius, not Valentine, because Valentine is the anglicization of Valentinius. But again, that's me being overly pedantic. Moving on.
All right. Various other muddlings of pagan and Catholic mid-February celebrations continued over the ensuing centuries, with Valentine's Day gradually taking on a somewhat more romantic tone in Europe than its early iterations had, helped along the way by the writings of Chaucer and Shakespeare.
Again, it's rather naive of you to assume there were no romantic implications of it prior to this. I think you just can't see other cultures' demonstrations of foreplay as what they are for some reason. Moving on.
All right. By the Middle Ages, handmade cards became popular, and with the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, commercially made cards arrived on the scene. Hallmark began the mass production of cards in 1913, and there has been no looking back since.
And before you go in and blame capitalism for that, I will point this out for those in the cheap seats one more time. Capitalism does not create desires whole cloth, it serves markets that it finds. Please get the fuck over this anti-capitalism bent. It would be best for everyone involved if you did. Moving on.
All right. Ka-ching, ka-ching. Next part. Canadians outspend Americans on Valentine's Day $164 compared to $136 per person. Valentine's Day sits in the middle of celebration spending in North America. More spent on, of course, December holidays. More spent on, of course, December holidays as well as Easter and Mother's Day. The less is spent on Halloween and Father's Day.
Okay, the idea that people spend more money on Valentine's Day than Halloween does actually irk me. This is the first time I've actually been upset by one of these statistics. Fuck that noise entirely.
Well, that's from 2018, so.
Right, but those of us who love Halloween should totally fucking compensate for this. It is fundamentally unacceptable to me that Halloween gets less spent on it than Valentine's Day. We should take steps to resolve this. God damn it. Halloween supremacy, Derp.
More than 12 million dozen roses are imported to Canada for the occasion, with florists doubling or more their usual price. Other hot ticket items include cards, candy, and jewelry. So this might actually be a Canadian article then. They're bringing up Canada.
Or they're trying to make some kind of globalist point. Who knows? Moving on.
All right. Next portion, benevolent sexism. As Valentine's Day became increasingly commercialized, it also headed in a decidedly sexist and heterosexist direction. Even in recent years, advertising excludes those who do not fit a nuclear heteronormative image of romance and love. And in those heterosexual images, we continue to see women as waiting for their male true love to declare his affection on this, the most romantic day of the year.
Yes, because like in every other circumstance in heterosexual relationships, it is the man's job to do and the woman's job to be gracious in the event that she is done for. And yet you want to make women the victim of this. Most of the displays that men do for women in and around Valentine's Day is an attempt to show them how much they care for and regard them. And yet you're going to turn this into women being victimized somehow. And again, I will point out that I am speaking as a gay dude, and even I can acknowledge that the reason why most imagery relating to Valentine's Day is heterosexual is because heterosexuality is the mathematical norm of fucking human beings. That, well, both literally and figuratively fucking human beings. But point being, the reason why most of the couples displayed on Valentine's Day are heterosexual is because most humans are heterosexual. I am aware that I am part of the remaining 10% of people, but 90% trumps 10%. Them's just the mathematical rules, and it doesn't have to be some sort of cynical cabal of norms for that to be the case. It's simply the end result of mathematical disparities in the number of entities in each camp. Duh. And usually the romance of Valentine's Day, much like the romance of romance novels in general, because women are the largest consumers of romantic material, full stop, is centered on the men's actions and the woman's approval. Meaning that most heterosexual men go out of their way to get most heterosexual women's approval in and around Valentine's Day. You moron. Moving on.
Maybe somewhat benevolent sexism compared to other forms of misogyny, but it is sexism nonetheless, which maintains stereotypical images of idealized femininity while reinforcing images of women as subordinate to and dependent on men. And it is heterosexism with large, as we see a few images of anything other than male-female love.
My sweet, what you have described thus far is not women in any way being subordinated. What you've been describing so far is women being pedestalized, because their approval is the thing that the men are attempting to earn with their various displays and their various peacockings of money, gifts, status, etc. Valentine's Day is one of the quintessential examples, in fact, of women actually being the sentimental center of society. Men's actions are sometimes worth more, men's doings are sometimes worth more, but women's beings have always been, with very, very few exceptions, worth more than men's beings, or very often men's doings in the first place. Because men are valued utilitarianly for what they do, have, get, etc., whereas women are almost always valued sentimentally. This can be a problem if you're a woman who wants to be valued for her agency, and my commiserations. But let's look at the other side of that equation and take stock and acknowledge that if you're a man who wants to be valued for his sentimentality, then you are up every shit crick without any paddles whatsoever most of the time. It takes entire, campaigns to get men's sentimentality valued fucking at all. Especially in absence of some greater doing that he does. Moving on.
All right. I mean, that's ultimately up to you, Giant Troll. It's asking if in the future prefer to not catch up or just skip to the front.
No, by all means, catch up. It's interesting reading your reactions sort of out of time, kind of. But yeah, that's mostly up to you. If you don't want to, then you don't have to. But if you prefer to, then go right ahead.
Yeah. All right. Last part. V-Day to the rescue. Because of my long-standing antipathy to Valentine's Day, it is not an event celebrated in my life. Right there with you. Granted, for very different reasons.
Yeah, namely, neither of us has a significant other as yet that we can engage in it with.
While I'm not denying anyone who wants to celebrate it, I just personally think I would treat every day as Valentine's Day with my significant other.
And I once more, for the record, point out the option of you can go even the extra mile on Valentine's Day if you want to.
That's fair. But again, it's just like, if they really matter to you, you're going to put the effort in every day.
True, but much like a birthday... Yeah, I know. But still, my thinking is, much like a birthday, it occasionally helps to have a day specifically set aside that you can plan for, and to occasionally put the metaphorical boot up your ass should you need it.
Okay, let's say if I did that, I would actually do it either like the couple days before Valentine's Day, just because like there's just a lot of busyness that goes, like a lot of people are going to do Valentine's Day.
Right.
So I want to avoid the hectic.
Yeah, I would frankly just put it at whatever the nearest weekend day was, because weekend is usually the day that people have off and shit.
Yeah, that makes no sense. Anyway, I dutifully assisted my children to make cards for their classmates, all of their classmates, but that was about the extent of what took place in our house. But now, thanks to Eve Ensler, we have V-Day, a global movement in violence against women and girls, with fundraising and public education events centered around February 14th. The V in V-Day stands for Victory, Valentine, and Vagina.
Oh, for the love of God. Okay. For those that don't know, Eve Ensler is one of the quintessential third-wave feminists, and she is an insufferable, crazy person. She frequently addresses people when she gets up on stage to speak in different venues with the phrase, "Are the vaginas in the house, and are there any vagina-friendly men in the house?" i.e., she refers to women as body parts when she refers to mass, stadiums of people. And yet women somehow cheer for this, and this isn't in any way objectifying them at all somehow. I don't fucking... Point being, Eve Ensler is a crazy person. and she is one of the loudest and most bizarre voices in third wave feminism. And because I am the token MRA here, I will point out that I'm all for getting rid of violence against women, but quite frankly, I would rather get rid of violence for everyone, i.e., advocate inclusively for men and boys as well, especially when violence against women almost universally gets prioritized over violence against men and boys. And that's some fucked up shit right there. Moving on.
All right. Okay. As Insler wrote in November 2011, I am over being polite about hard R. It's been too long now. We have been too understanding. We need to let our rage and our compassion connect us so we can change the paradigm of global hard R. Sounds a lot better than chocolates or roses to me.
Okay, fine, but what about all the heterosexual men who get assaulted by women? And they do exist. What about the men who will call the police on their abusive significant others and very often be the ones that those police officers end up detaining instead of their significant other because of the assumption that men are always the violent ones? What about all those men in heterosexual relationships who get their own ejaculate sprung on them because the woman saves the condom and now whoops, she's pregnant and you're on the hook for 18 years of child support and so on? I'm not saying that I want anyone whatsoever to be raped, but humans already prioritize for the women's almost automatically. And it is high fucking time we start acknowledging that men can be victims of women's toxic behavior as much as they can other men's toxic behavior, and as much as women can be victims of their toxic behavior. I'm mostly advocating for this under the auspices that we automatically deal with women's issues. And so much the better. I'm glad I don't live in the third world where women get all sorts of unspeakable things done to them because their countries are too poor to act civilized and so on. But I do happen to live in the Western world where very often men's own issues get ignored because it takes away from women's issues, quote unquote, somehow. Moving on. I'm assuming Brainstormer is grabbing the trailer.
Son of a bitch. I literally was talking. I forgot to unmute myself.
It happens.
Yeah,
Sorry.
full honesty, Dawn and I had top 5 lists planned, but unfortunately we were unable to really finish them.
Neither of us actually managed to finish our lists prior to showtime. So
yeah, it was. I don't know why it was. It just was difficult to figure out.
The top 10 was going. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to. Well, top 5. I don't want to spoil the topic of it.
Yeah. We will get to it next week because presumably the next week or so will give us time in which to fucking find the remaining numbers.
Yeah. Well, Dawn for 2. I just need 1. So. Yeah. So we're just gonna do a trailer for something that's supposed to come out this month, I believe. I remember seeing it like a month or so ago. It fits within the general like stuff we're usually talking about. and it is related to Valentine's Day. So,
Yeah.
Let me pull that up.
Mhm.
It is the official trailer for Heart Eyes, which is let me read the description here. Okay. It is from the producers of Scream. That's not bad.
Mhm.
For the past several years, the Hard Eyes Killer has wreaked havoc on Valentine's Day by stalking and murdering romantic couples. This Valentine's Day, no one is safe. And I believe the tagline is "Stay single, stay safe."
I mean, I like the idea of a Valentine's Day themed horror movie.
The other one I can really remember is My Bloody Valentine, but I don't really think that really counts per se.
Yeah, I mean, the best possible thing would be if Michael Dougherty continued his tradition of like lore-based holiday horror movies. Um, and quite frankly, if you wanted to use like Cupid or Bacchus or Aphrodite as a like supernatural horror movie antagonist, that would actually be very easy because Aphrodite's mythology can be very fucked up, as can Cupid's, as can Bacchus, and so on. So like,
Oh,
if
holy shit.
yeah, if Michael Dougherty ever gets around to continuing his surfeit of like
Okay, so I looked up the director, Josh Rubin.
mhm.
The guy was on College Humor.
Okay.
You know those you know those shorts like girls you're gonna date
Yeah,
in college. He was the guy.
it's a small world after all.
Also, well, he's also in one of the other ones. Grammar Nazi. It's one of my favorites. Funny because it's parodying the whole Han scene from *Inglourious Basterds*, the opening of that.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. But I'm also looking at he's done some other stuff too. Like if anyone remembers the 2021 movie Werewolves Within, he directed that.
My favorite college humor bit was the Jeggings teacher. If you remember the Jeggings related series,
I don't.
which kind of honestly reminds me of this more recent one, I think originally from TikTok, where it's a substitute teacher in 2045 or something, and they all have like very modern meme influencer type slang
Oh,
names.
I've seen those. Yeah,
Yeah. I
actually,
I I want to say that those were probably inspired by the Jenkins guy
right.
from College Humor,
Um,
but I could be wrong. It's just they're so very similar that it would stun me if they weren't inspired.
anyway,
If he wasn't
so
inspired by the Jenkins guy,
yeah, so this is I want to say this is kind of a horror comedy, obviously. Um,
which sounds fun. Actually, like
yeah.
there aren't
Um,
enough horror comedies just in general these days. There need to be more.
yeah. Well, like I said, the guy did. I think it was a horror comedy. I didn't watch it, unfortunately. I never got a chance to. I just remember seeing the trailer for it. Werewolves Within from 2021.
Yeah, I
Um,
hope I hope this is successful. If for no other reason than I think one, there should be more Valentine's Day based movies in general, and two, Valentine's Day related horror movies. Although I'm not gonna lie, my ultimate end goal is to get Michael Dougherty doing his version, because Michael Dougherty and I seem to be cut from the same cloth with regards to the thing about the thing should be about the lore of the thing. So so there's that. But this will do in the meantime until we can get Michael Dougherty to add some more to his uh oeuvre.
all right. What? Damn it! What did we ever think of something for Valentine's Day?
I don't think we did. And the only thing I can think of is those little hearts with the like words on them, but I don't know what they're called.
I thought they were just called candy hearts.
We'll go with that for the time being. Candy hearts.
All right, candy hearts.
You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch.
Okay. This is First of all, whoever got the idea to use that song in this is amazing.
You know, the only time
I'm already smiling.
The only time I've heard this song is that version from Son of the Mask.
It's weird that was also the first thing that came to my mind too.
That's the only time I've ever heard it ever used, to be honest. I've never heard
I've heard it lots of times, but I think the first place I ever heard it was that, and now I can't hear that song without immediately thinking of Son of the Mask, which is actually better than most people give it credit for. The only parts of it that don't work are the ones that are specifically focused on Jamie Kennedy's character.
Also, apparently,
but anything related to the actual mask works fine in that movie.
Also, apparently, Olivia Holt is playing one of the main characters, and you don't know who that is. She was a big Disney Channel star in the 2010s.
Her name is not familiar to me. Who was she?
She was in Kickin' It.
I saw like one trailer for that, and I never watched that show. I don't think.
Yeah, it was Disney XD. I doubt you would have been into it, and you were old at the time, so.
Well, I mean, I liked a lot of Disney XD stuff, especially Aaron and Stone. I wish that show had gone on longer. It deserved to.
Yeah, honestly, I never got to watch that much because I think it was like with Tron Legacy. It's like it had such a weird scheduling for the show.
Yeah, it died because the studio had no faith in it.
And there was this one Disney series. I Didn't Do It. She played one of the twins, like main characters. It's where like they're doing like they show like the aftermath of like a crazy adventure of the episode, and then they flash back to how it all happened.
So and sort of like Phineas and Ferb if the mom actually did catch them.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Anyway.
Poor Candace. The universe constantly conspired to just make her seem increasingly more crazy. Poor Candace.
All right. Shall we?
Candy hearts.
Candy hearts.
For the past 2 years, a masked maniac known as the Hard-Eyes Killer has stalked,
hunted,
and brutally slain couples on Valentine's Day.
Sorry, I had an itch that needed to be scratched, and I couldn't do it with the camera on.
I didn't know that was the other time.
But yeah, this movie seems like it's going to be a lot of fun, actually.
Are you talking about John Charles talking about it might be The Dew he might be talking about. I've watched him a few times, yeah. I'm not sure. I haven't. Could be wrong. Anyway, shall we?
Candy hearts.
Candy hearts.
With no motive yet uncovered.
This is more than just murder. He's like Cupid with a kink.
Oh, so much.
You know, I know some people have always. I've hated this too. Like the Candyman trailer. You know, from like what was it, 2020 or 2022?
Yeah, the remake.
I hated the song. You know, Say My Name. I got it was appropriate, but like the scary remixes for a lot of trailers for horror movies never really seem to work, in my opinion. Most of the times, but this one actually doesn't seem too bad.
Yeah, no, I think this one works because it is supposed to be kind of a horror comedy, so it's kind of being in on the joke a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Candy Hearts.
We're being chased by a fucking serial killer.
I like how they're still focusing on the. It's a love movie, but it's also. It doesn't look like they're shying away from. They're not just completely abandoning one part of the movie, right?
Right.
It's good. Shows
I
confidence.
don't know why, but the name Heart Eyes makes me think of like the Corinthian from Sandman, except like instead of the teeth for eyes, it's hearts where his eyes should be for some reason.
Maybe just a you thing, man.
I am entirely aware. I just thought it bore remarking upon, so I remarked upon it. Candy Hearts.
Hang on one sec. Candy Hearts.
You good?
He's gonna keep killing people. We end it here.
Hey, come on.
Is this giving anyone else Cabin in the Woods vibes?
A little bit, yeah. And I guess you mean like in like obviously both horror comedy, but also kind of. Well, it's also like kind of Scream, right? Too.
Yeah.
Well, producers of Scream on this too. So.
That's not bad. That's not bad company to be in. Cabin in the Woods is freaking amazing. So
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, I don't really got anything else to say right now. So.
Candy Hearts.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy B-Day!
Get killed, all right?
What was...
Why would he say that?
Yeah, this looks fun.
Yeah. I think it already came out because I saw it coming out February 7th. Today's the 8th, so it came out yesterday then.
Okay. Hopefully it tops the weekend box office.
Candy Hearts?
Candy Hearts.
I will say, costume-wise, Mask is cool. I just wish they gave him a little more style with the clothing, you know?
Mm.
You know, because he's basically just wearing like a black trench coat with, so.
Yeah, which is almost cliche at this point.
Yeah. I mean, if you decked it out with like Valentine imagery or iconography on it.
Yeah, like all sorts of hearts and cupids and so on.
Yeah.
I hope they avoid the only negative possibility I can see with this, which is don't make the killer an incel for the love of all that is holy.
Well, from what we're seeing, it looks like they're just portraying him as like a mostly slasher.
Yeah, but I'm more concerned with when they reveal who the killer is and give his backstory, because they inevitably will. I please avoid the heavy-handed incel commentary, for the love of fuck. If you can manage that, then this movie looks amazing. I get a kind of sixth sense when it comes to these kind of things, and please avoid the incel commentary. Because at this point, that seems to be the only thing I could see sinking this, is if they go really heavy-handed political at the end.
Well, anyway, with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidazai, sign out, peace, cheers, and
Fuck off so I can go back to reading.